welcome to episode 8 of the Sisyphus complex solution. For the observant of you, you may have noticed that there was a bit of a difference to the quote page during the intro this time, in so much as that it's normally got somebody with a little bit of gravitas, whereas this time I put in a guy called Malcolm Tucker, a character called Malcolm Tucker. Anybody that's familiar with the programme The Thick of It, that's who it comes from. Basically he was a rip-off character of the spin doctor, Alistair Campbell, during the Tony Blair period. So fairly similar to Alistair Campbell, and that Malcolm Tucker was just a foul-mouthed spin doctor propaganda artist. So I thought it would be appropriate for this particular episode, because I'm going to be concentrating on just one department within the Cabinet Office today, which is hence the title of The Influencers, because it's going to be about the Office for Registered Consultant Lobbyists. This is going to be, it is a bit more of a complicated conversation than just saying it's about the lobbyists, because I think some people have a certain perspective of what that means. So I just want to look at that in a little bit of detail. I can't go too far because obviously I've got a limited amount of time. So there is a bit that I wanted to touch on before we get started, which is in relation to an article that came out from The Critic. Some of you that keep an eye on LinkedIn will know that I've posted this earlier on this week, where the article is saying that it's time to have the wiring diagram back again. And just to be clear about that, that is I'm just saying, you can see it in the article there, that does mean the John Hoskyns government wiring diagram, which is precisely what this is all about. If you go back to episode 1, there it is. I do bring it forward and say, well, this was something that I'd remembered from 1979. I remember that particular process, and this process that I'm doing is bringing that wiring map up to date. I'll have the links as per usual, and so if a certain Mr. Cummings happens to come across it, and in his hopes of finding at least 2 people capable of doing something like this, as I said in my LinkedIn post, I'm already doing it. So who knows? Get in touch, and as long as you promise to stop the blue socialist bullshit, then might be able to get somewhere. Right, so I want to go into stuff around the influencers, which does obviously lead into the lobbying side of things. I'm going to make a little bit of a mention in terms of influence, because obviously influence is not just based on the lobby groups. The reason why I've got the second segment within this of fuck off to the United Nations and World Economic Forum is because they are influencers to government, despite nobody asking them to. There's never been anything in any manifesto in any country anywhere in the world where they've said, right, we want the United Nations or World Economic Forum to tell us what to do. Hence my response of, they can fuck off. For those that are not aware, and for those that seem to think that all of that sort of stuff is a very big conspiracy theory, and they think, well, Agenda 2030 doesn't actually exist, there's just a little bit of the page that is very easily found. Put UK Government Agenda 2030, and you can find the PDF document that just comes up automatically. It's really not difficult. Have a look in your own country. It will be there. It was originally Agenda 21. And the picture by the side of that is John Major signing that Agenda 21 agreement on between the 3rd and 14th of June in 1992 at the Rio Earth Summit, obviously in Brazil, and where he signed the UK up to this agenda. Lots of people will turn around and say, well, you know, when they finally decided, well, it might not be a conspiracy theory, it does actually exist, but it's harmless. You know, it's, oh, look at all of the wonderful things that it's suggesting. there has to be a little bit of brain power engaged around that sort of thing to understand that you're not really going to have, or you never had, when say for example the Nazi Party in the 1930s, once they got going, and that's, I mean, a part of their rhetoric wasn't, by the way, we're going to try and gas all the Jews. That wasn't stipulated up front. So you have to look a little bit past the rhetoric and actually understand that what you've got there is the atypical scenario of people using propaganda and bastardisation of language to make things seem more innocent than they actually are. You have to look at the actions behind it. You have other areas of influence which do tie into these areas, because like I said, I mean, the amount of nonsense that's going on all over the world really at the moment, particularly obviously in the likes of the UK and the US especially. That's why I'm going to point to somebody in particular in a moment. A lot of these things do end up being connected, as much as so many things seem to be very random, and you've got the people saying, oh well, you know, the communists are doing this, and there's the fascists are doing that, and all these different groups that seem to be sprouting up all over the place, and everybody's thinking, well, what's happened for all these different groups to be appearing all of a sudden? There is a lot of commonality amongst it. I'm not going to be going into that in any level of detail, but the one thing I would suggest that people that are aware of this or that do look into this, in terms of being concerned to any great degree, you only have to really look back in a little bit of history and that know that it always falls down. There's always something various things that take place for all of these things to fall down, and by and large it's down to the vast majority of the people telling them to do one. And you also have to take into consideration what type of people these individuals are at the end of the day, and that's why I will bring up a certain individual from the US that is very well known for having been involved in various levels of propaganda over the years, including down to things like creating the term fossil fuel. Fossil fuel, I mean, it's not fossil fuel. Oil is not based from fossils. He just created that name in order to be able to make it seem like there was going to be a shortage of oil, so that then the price would go up. I mean, he is literally or his family essentially, and that because they've continued this shit. They are the original snake oil salesman. And as much as lots of people will say, because again, a lot of the stuff that you'll see from the likes of Bill Gates and Warren Buffett and what have you, a lot of the stuff that they try to do is very much influenced by what Rockefeller used to get up to. And the one area of commonality amongst all of that sort of stuff is the fact that there's a great deal of repetition. A lot of the stuff that you see taking place now, you can look back in various other points in history and various other countries. I mean, lots of people are talking about what's happened in Russia previously, what's happened in China, so on and so forth, even down to what happened in Germany in the 1930s. There are always a lot of commonalities there, and one of the key reasons for that is that, to my mind, these people have developed a particular train of thought which is largely in line with one of their other agendas, and that's around eugenics, where they seem to think that there's the genius gene, which basically then ends up being, and that's with these sorts of people, and that ending up with like incestuous relationships as far as I'm concerned, and it spawns bigger and bigger morons the more generations go by. Oh, in this particular fella, J.D. Rockefeller, to give you a little something that I tend to compare this guy with, the banjo boy from Deliverance. I'm sure as an actual individual himself, and that, I mean, I have seen pictures of him as he's grown up and that, and he seems like a perfectly happy chap. But in terms of the particular character and the look, similarities, certain similarities. So we'll just go with the character of the boy from Deliverance. So once you've had the genius gene that's spread through incest, you're probably going to want to be checking between your fingers to see if there's any webs around. But anyway, might as well take the piss out of these people, because if they've got terrible intentions towards us, then fuck them, frankly. So let's move forward proper with the the Sisyphus complex solution. Now, there's a little bit of divulgence that I have to give to be able to bring this one forward, because when we start to go into areas around the registered consultant lobbyists, it's a bit of a bizarre scenario as far as I'm concerned, because this is supposed to be set up so that there's the ease of access, ease of conversations and things of this nature with members of Parliament. And I'll also give another example in a little while, and that on another slide. But I want to bring up just these few examples of Conservative MPs who I've met. I'm not a registered consultant lobbyist, but I've met all of these and more. I could, I suppose, say that I have met Boris Johnson, but I mean, it was very brief, and it was more a case of him looking at me as he was walking by, and I just sort of went, all right, and that was basically it. I didn't give a shit. But I have met all of these people. It's not difficult. The confession I would make is I think the only Labour MP, or from any other party for that matter, and that might have been that, I can't remember if I met Stephen Ladyman, possibly, because he was the local MP here. I mean, obviously, and that there was a something like about an 8-year period where the people in this area had lost the plot and decided to vote Labour. Really quite ridiculous, but obviously they've seen their senses since. I might have met him before he got kicked out in 2010. But there was this notion that there is no availability to meet with politicians unless you're signed up as this registered consultant and somehow special privileges. It really is a nonsense. I mean, you can meet with your local MP. Not overly difficult. I mean, I'm sure some people find it a little bit difficult, but if you know what you're doing, it's not. And for the MPs that have got very specific interests in that, you can arrange to meet them at Portcullis House. It's not overly difficult. So to imagine that there is no access to these people outside of particular influential circles, it doesn't ring true. So I just wanted to give that little bit of disclosure as well, and that's to say that, I know how to do this stuff. I'm sure a lot of you people know how to do this stuff. What it's like in other countries, you tell me. But like I said, I just want to point out that little bit. So let's move into the office itself. This is the full list of all of the organisations, companies, etc. that are registered. Now, I've also, as per usual, I put up the budget. The budget with this particular one, and that is going to be, there's some slight variations that I might need to look at a little bit later on, because obviously they do take fees from these organisations to sign up to it. So the 264 might end up being around about 120, but £120,000 that is, in terms of savings, because as per usual I will be recommending that this is just not needed. Simple as that. So that figure may come down to around about the 120,000. There are certain aspects as we're going forward, and that once I do actually start to move into much more detail around the full suggestion list and the full policy implementation plans, there's things like assets and stuff of this nature, and these figures will start to chop and change a little bit. But I wanted to put down the operational expense for this one, because some of the figures around revenue and that don't make an awful lot of sense. But so these are the companies. Within their annual report, they say that they've got 143 listed members, and they do turn around and have the usual updates as what we've done this year, like their little school report, and saying how well they're keeping the page and how well the register is being kept and all this sort of stuff. Well, obviously not, because like I say, they say they've got 143. Well, there's 166 on there. I mean, I can identify, 1, 4, 5, 6, 7 of them that quite clearly were defunct. An awful lot of them that are registered don't have the websites. I've got the website. Basically, I've got more information on these companies than this department has, and it took me, I don't know, a couple of hours, if that. Now, the thing of it is that within these, the important parts in that, I've put the notes at the top there, and that's say like the 7 think tanks. The 28 of them at least having the failed ideology. I should say ideology. I'm missing the D. Some terrible spelling there. I should probably start again, but I won't because I can't be arsed. That should say ideology, propaganda. This is because they represent organisations that I wouldn't really be too happy with any government representing them and speaking to them, even because of the amount of bullshit that they come out with. So I'll give some examples. So we've got a company called Policy Connect. Now what I have to understand, I should give a little bit of a preamble to this. The vast majority of these companies, as in like 99% of them, they're not actual what you would call traditional lobbyists as such. They are all basically just marketing companies. They are there to create propaganda for whoever's message it is they're being paid to produce. They're not really political specialists or anything of that nature. The vast majority of them, you look at the staff members and whatever, it's a bunch of fucking kids that don't know their arse from their elbow. It's just whether they can vomit out something and that has got all the right keywords in it. So it's another reason why this is really not what it should be at all. So to give some example, you've got the company Policy Connect that pushes messages for the likes of Greenpeace. I'm sure there'll be a bunch of people out there that think, well, Greenpeace, surely that's all right. Well, no, Greenpeace are consistent liars. Simple as that. One of the key prospects that, one of the key messages that they ended up delivering was that is having an effect still, and I believe there's going to be some changes taking place in the UK again very, very shortly. They were the ones that created this absolute garbage around plastics. I mean, I'm sure you remember the David Attenborough BBC documentary. Was it Blue World or whatever the bloody hell it was? Or all the plastics in the ocean, all the plastics are everywhere, and you know it's a plastic world and we're all going to die. Complete and utter bollocks. I mean, seriously, total bullshit. And what have you got as a result of that? You got all these firms that are turning out, oh, we're going to get rid of plastic, we're going to get rid of that. Your shopping bags, oh, now it's 5p. Here's where the part that's going to be changing shortly, and that they're now going to put it up to 10 pence. For what? Because somebody shoved a fucking straw up a turtle's nose? I mean, and it really is as serious as that, the amount of lies that these people will tell. They will actually go out and harm creatures to push a bullshit message. So would I allow people like that anywhere near the government? No. Right, then you've got a company called Incisive Health. Now, with a name like Incisive Health, you would imagine that they are concentrated very much on trying to put together the propaganda for, say, for example, pharmaceutical companies. Well, within that, they push the messages for an organisation called 38 Degrees. 38 Degrees, bunch of leftist fucking morons. It literally is one of the areas where, I mean, so for example, like you have people that will try to push things like that, excrement rebellion. It's that kind of nonsense. Nobody should be paying any attention to them. There's a video that I'm not going to put it up. I'm not going to put a link in there. I can't be asked. There was a video with Douglas Murray at the New Culture Forum. You can find it quite easily yourself. Where one of the key messages from Douglas Murray is we have to understand who it is that's actually saying anything of any value to us. who are the ones that are lying? Who are the ones that are more intent on, effectively, more intent on destruction than creation? Who is actually looking towards the betterment of a nation? People like Greenpeace are not. They're just one big bullshit artist organisation that tries to pull at people's heartstrings so that they can get loads of money, loads of morons that donate because they think that, oh God, I'm going to be saving the planet if I do this. You're not. You're just going to be handing over money to a bunch of greedy little shits. 38 degrees, same sort of crap. Company called Principal Affairs. They represent the Open Society. Who is Open Society? Certain Mr. Soros. The Open Society are renowned, absolutely renowned for being quite the opposite of open anything. I mean, they are clearly pushing a communist closed society agenda. There's nothing nice about these people at all. And considering that their main backer is George Soros, that likes to go around and try to destroy currencies and create havoc wherever he goes, why wouldn't anybody give these people the time of day, let alone be a marketing firm with any sense of ethics and morals? Why would you take their money? So stuff like this I wouldn't allow. You've got the Blakeney Group that represents something called the Global Fund. What's the Global Fund? Well, that's the Gates Foundation. Again, pushing lots and lots of bullshit. There needs to be awareness as to who you are allowing access to. You need to have awareness as to whether we want politics to have a little bit more integrity, a bit more moral standing. So, I mean, the thing about this is that when you've got a political system that has increasingly developed a method of speaking, a way of approaching the public that is just very disingenuous, and where politicians are trained as to how they're supposed to speak, it means that you're losing your focus on what you should actually be doing. So a lot of this, I suppose, to give a little bit of background to this, politicians, if you can find some videos of interviews with politicians going back to, say, like the 1950s, the 1960s, were they always very much straightforward in what they were saying? Not especially, but there was very much a distinct relationship between anybody doing the interviewing and the politician themselves. There was a measure of respect there, and I'm sure everybody can agree that level of respect has now gone completely. The people that do the interviewing, and that seem to think that they're, Jesus Christ, they seem to think that they are the be and end all, and all things must be answered according to whatever it is that they think. And that's given the media a really overblown sense of self-importance. And you get the same thing from these types of companies. They seem to think that everything that they produce is the message. It's something that they think that they're producing the kind of messages that the public need to hear, or that will help persuade the public to think in this uniform fashion. And that's been one of the key problems that we've ended up with political systems, and it's also why you end up with all of these levels of corruption as well. Is that if you have politicians that are more interested in what they look like, more interested in whether they've done a decent performance on television, those things taking priority over whether they actually know what the bloody hell they're doing, something is distinctly wrong. So it also then leads into wider conversations such as the age of politicians. So, for example, you've had certain politicians that have been elected where a big thing is made of it, that where they'll say, well, the youngest politicians who have been elected and things of this nature. So there's nothing admirable about that. If a younger person doesn't know what the hell they're doing, if they've had no sort of career before that, why would it be a good thing for them to be involved? This is why when you go back to the likes of the 1950s and the 1960s, all of the politicians and that were predominantly older men. Now, again, does it have to be men? No, it can be women. I mean, I'm not talking about going back to being things like that. But what I'm talking about is people that had already gone through a reasonable career, had an understanding as to what it was that they were doing, and would be able to speak on some level of intellectual capability to be able to suggest what it is that they're actually looking to achieve. Things started to take a turn in the UK, at least, and that from well, it did actually have a portion of this and that in the 1960s, because Harold Wilson was the first one that I would suggest where just a minor thing, but little bits of inclination as to what was to come. Because as with all things and that, you tend to have this spiral as to where things start to get out of control. Because Harold Wilson was the Prime Minister between 1964 to 1970, but where people remember him most was between 1974 to 76, where he was an absolute bloody disaster. That was when the UK, the last time for all of the silly little shits out there that don't think that we know exactly what's going on, he was responsible for the UK being bloody socialist and an absolute disaster that the country turned into under the likes of that prat. I mean, you could say the same thing about Ted Heath as well, because he was being led by the nose all over the place by the socialist morons. But yeah, the UK was a shithole in the 1970s. It's as simple as that, and it was down to the likes of these prats. But where the start point was is that Harold Wilson was most well known for having his pipe. The man never smoked a pipe in his life. It was just there as a stunt piece. He thought it would make him look more like a man of the people if he had a pipe. So it was based on bullshit. It's the start of the propaganda machine. As much as I'm a favourable opinion towards Margaret Thatcher during her first 2 terms, later on, because I mean she did go a little bit off the rails, but she was also one that took things to the next step, where she had the voice coaching, and it was the case of, well, what am I wearing? Have I got the right dress on? Have I got the right handbag? It's irrelevant bullshit. And then it got really out of control in the UK during the Blair period. Fortunately, I wasn't here for the vast majority of it, because he came in 1997. I'd already been gone out of the UK for 6 years by then. And he stayed until 2007. So just as I was coming back, he'd gone. I mean, that man was phenomenal with the amount of bullshit that he would come out with. And hence why I put the Malcolm Tucker at the beginning, because it was Alistair Campbell that was with him and that was doing a lot of this nonsense. And it then led into, and like I say, I mean, when you've had the stuff around the media as well, as much as I've now turned around and said, well, okay, here's the politicians that started to make things worse. In terms of the media itself, you had somebody like, there was a guy called Robin Day, where he became particularly well known for an interview in 1958, where he interviewed Harold Macmillan and was essentially quite rude towards him. Now, as much as that gave him some notoriety, it became that slow, gradual process where he started to really kick into action when he was running a program called Question Time between 1979 to 1989, where it's this I know better than you type of approach to things. And so, as much as this is going to be a target towards the lobbyists, I think it becomes a subject as to wider considerations as to what we want our politicians to be like, what we want our media to be like. Instead of these people influencing us, maybe it's about time we did a little bit of influence back. And that's going to require us having a little bit of, I'll go back again to previous episodes where I've said around about responsibility. we need to understand our own responsibility and what our expectations should be of the politicians, because you only end up with all of these scandals over somebody happened to have said a wrong word or all this sort of nonsense, because the media play it up and then people have all this fake outrage. Generally speaking, when you go out into the public, I would imagine the vast majority of the times they couldn't give a monkeys. So maybe it's about time the public actually started to let on that fact. First and foremost, learn it, then let it on, because there's two parts to that. The first one is that understanding that, getting accustomed to, again, that a politician needn't be put in a position whereby they have to be so cautious around what they say because of some media dick looking for the next gotcha moment. So that people need to let the media understand it. So just let them speak freely. If they make a couple of errors, is it really the end of the world? Does it really matter? Get the words out. As long as we understand what it is that you're trying to do, as long as we understand that, you know, everybody can make a slip of the tongue. I do it in practically every episode that I'm doing here. I mean, I'm talking about slips of the tongue. I'm talking about potentially not using the right word, and that, you know, you could have had a better word to describe what it is that you're trying to get across. I'm not talking about fucking senile Joe Biden shit. I'm talking about allowing a politician to be able to speak with some level of freedom, providing they actually know what they're talking about. Then you might start to see political parties say, well, okay, well, rather than having the next career politician in, we need somebody that actually does understand the healthcare system, so we can put them in charge of that healthcare system. We need somebody that has had a career in the military, so they understand how to deal with these things. Somebody that understands contracts, somebody that understands law. People that are competent within the areas that they're supposed to be looking after, rather than whether they've got a nice polished look and can talk bullshit to the media. Now, that would be a fine thing. The other part of that is for the public themselves to be able to recognise that and learn their own sense of responsibility. And the example I've got over this one goes back to the 2010 general election over here, when the Conservatives came in after Blair and Brown had fucked the country up. Now, I helped out a little bit. You know, I wasn't some great campaigner and that. I mean, I did a few bits and pieces for when I was a Conservative, when I thought that there still was a Conservative Party. And back in 2010, I didn't realise that it turned into blue socialist wankers. But the most memorable part of that election for me was when the conversations started to come out in terms of everybody saying, well, exactly how deep in the shit are we? What level of mess has been created through the crash of, was it 2007, 2008? And, you know, how much money had been given to the banks to bail them out, all this sort of stuff. And people were asking for honesty. Well, that did resonate momentarily. And between David Cameron and George Osborne, they said, right, okay, if you want some honesty, we'll give you some honesty. And they started to point out exactly how much in the shit we were. Can't remember off the top of my head and that what the figures were or all the rest of it, and that it's not really important to what I'm trying to get across. When they started to deliver that message, almost immediately there was a backlash. And it, as much as, again, you could say, well, was it a media backlash? I know it wasn't a media backlash because I was out talking to people as well, and I did see it for myself amongst the general public, where they were moaning like hell to say, well, where's the positive message? Why aren't you giving us a positive message? So you can't ask for the truth and then demand a positive message when there isn't one to give. So again, that boils down to the responsibility of the public to understand these things as well. And if people were to, on both sides or on all sides of the equation. So public, politicians, media, everybody. If they were to understand, to remove the spin and the bullshit and understand that not everything is hunky-dory all the bloody time, that there are going to be occasions where you say, well, okay, well, this is what the problem is. I mean, it would be nice to say, well, this is the period of time that we think it's the solutions are going to be required for, and at the end of that we're hoping to see X as a result. That's all very well and good, but when somebody when people are told, well, you know, you might have to put up with an awful lot of crap for about 10 years, they're a bit reluctant to put up with it. But unfortunately, you have to. And the only way that you understand how you're going to be able to resolve those problems, again, the push of the conversation then was anti-austerity. Well, essentially, what I'm doing through this process would essentially equate to austerity in the public propaganda machine. In reality, what it is getting rid of rubbish that we don't need the government to be wasting our money on, and that would remove an awful lot of the influences that end up costing us money. Most of the stuff that ends up causing the general public pain in the long term is brought about by them expecting and demanding things that they really shouldn't be entitled to in the first place. And I'm not talking about, you know, like I've mentioned this one before now, I'm not talking about taking assistance away from disabled people and things like that. That, for my mind, I'm not a libertarian as such, and I'm certainly not a full-on capitalist in terms of each to their own. Everybody looks after themselves, and if you fall by the wayside, tough shit. I do believe in levels of social programs, but I believe in appropriate levels of social programs. So it does end up essentially being like this, the Rhine capitalist system that we actually have, not a capitalist system. People need to understand the difference between the two. But we can make it work far more effectively with far less money and far better relationships between the public and the government, whether that be on a national level or a local level. So it's getting, again, like I say, that level of responsibility, that level of understanding, expecting or allowing the politicians to actually be honest. So these types of areas that are quite important, and I think organisations like these, basically propaganda merchants, they don't do anybody any favours. There's only a couple of instances where, well, there's two of them, and I've got two think tanks that are stated within this. One of them is, again, pushing socialist bullshit, so I would never have any interest in them, and we've got it in the lessons learned already. It's a failed ideology, don't want to know. But I do think there's quite a few think tanks that should have access to government. Now, they can gain access in the same way as I already demonstrated previously, in that you call up your politician and that you go and meet him at Portcullis House. The difference would be that I wouldn't be overly interested in them turning up on a daily basis and saying, I think you should do this and I think you should do that. If you're a think tank, then you should develop a proper policy, a well thought out policy that you can then present to the appropriate politician and say, well, we think that this would actually be a benefit. And it would be evidence based, empirical, so following the same logic as I've been stating throughout, and allow them to do that. Because if anybody's expecting government to be the ones to generate all of the best ideas, well, you're going to be sitting there waiting for a fucking long time. So that's what think tanks are for. The Centre for Policy Studies, as much as they've shifted a little bit too far along this blue socialist line as far as I'm concerned, but that was the think tank where John Hoskyns originated. And that's where he developed that government wiring map within that think tank. So they can have use. So it's just a matter of everybody deciding, well, how do we want ideas to be generated? What's the best way for them to be formulated? How do we get as many people as possible involved? I mean, that could be one area of think tanks that is developed further, whereby there are certain members within that group, and it's not really something where the general public can start developing ideas. But then it's up to the public and that to say, well, do something similar to what I'm doing now. It's open. You can put your ideas out there. You can say, I think this is a good idea, that's a bad idea. Let's investigate things and see if we can come up with some sort of common understanding of what actually makes sense, and we can run through the process around that and develop a program that could be put forward. So things of that nature, I think, would be a reasonable development, and we don't need all of these propaganda merchants. I mean, the number of them that are going, oh, we're going to put out propaganda about the NHS. Ludicrous. Putting out the scientifically questionable ideas, and that's largely, once again, and that's around the climate bullshit. There's a very large number of them that are pushing this message of what do you do post-COVID. Well, what the fuck do they know about it? A bunch of kids that are probably all, once they've, they do about 2 hours work and that, and then they run out the streets and that shouting Black Lives Matter. What the fuck do they know about it? I'll be very cautious about anybody that is pushing messages on areas where damn well they don't know what the hell they're talking about. So then we do move into some examples. I mean, I've got a range of different data around all of these different subject matters. I can't show everything. There's not the time. So within this particular segment here, and there's just a few samples of data that I've got around meetings that were held in 2017, 2018, 2019 with the Department for International Development and the Department for, was it DEFRA? I can't remember what DEFRA stands for. Doesn't matter. But anyway. So again, this is further evidence that this organisations having meetings with ministers that doesn't have to go through a lobbyist. They're having access anyway. And it does kind of suggest once more that in terms of removing the lobbying consultants, it might also be wise to have some sort of guidance, restriction, something along those lines, and that's to say, well, maybe you'd be wise not to have meetings with these particular individuals. So, I mean, hopefully the screen will be clear enough and that for you to be able to pause it and have a look and see which ones you might want to point out to. I mean, this is just very small samples. The data sheets themselves are quite extensive. I've just picked out a few. So you've had within DFID, you get meetings with like the Open Society. So that group again, these people that are absolutely determined to destroy things, not create things. Why are they meeting with ministers? Family planning. Anybody that thinks about family planning, anybody that's out in America, that's basically your version of Planned Parenthood. So the Killer Baby Brigade. You've got something called the Council of Sustainable Business. Again, that's pushing that climate change bullshit. Why aren't any of these ministers asking the question? Give me the scientific method. Show me who solved the closure problem. Until you've done that, until you've got the evidence for it, the burden of proof is on you. Until then, fuck off. Obviously, and that's the one that people will love here, and that was Michael Gove having a meeting with Bill Gates. That took place on It was in 2019. I can't read the date, it's a little bit too small on here. But anyway, yeah, 2009. So a personal meeting with Michael Gove and Bill Gates. Are you going to end up with situations where certain individuals of certain standing are going to be taking place? I think it's unrealistic to imagine that that won't happen. But it took a bit for me to be able to get this sort of information. I think a little bit, at least a little bit more transparency might be in order. So, things of this nature. Now, there's another part to this. So this is examples of people that are getting direct access to government ministers. They don't need a lobbyist. They don't need somebody to, I mean, if they want to employ a propaganda merchant externally and then develop whatever bullshit message that they want to push into a minister, that's entirely up to them. But they don't need these lobbyists to be able to gain the access, because they can get it themselves. Like I say, we just need to be able to have that particular guidance. So that, I mean, these are my policy suggestions around this, so that we can end up developing some sort of a picture that creates more responsible governance. Now, there were two other organisations named within the lobbyists which don't make a great deal of sense to me, because they are effectively government funded organisations themselves. I'll just move into the next slide. So, some people might be familiar with what a catapult is. I dare say a lot of people won't. Now, within the registered lobbyists, you had the Connected Places Catapult and the Future Cities Catapult, which is a slightly unusual one, because the Future Cities Catapult, you see, everybody can do a Joe Biden. Not sure if I've got the senility, but I'm sure it'll come soon. The Future Cities Catapult is actually within Connected Places Catapult. So why both of them need to be registered as lobbyists, I don't quite understand that. But more importantly, both of these organisations and all catapults are effectively government funded organisations anyway. So why do they need to be lobbying anyone? A lot of how the catapults work, I mean, I may need to go into this in a little bit more detail later on, because this will fall directly under the lines of how we look at policy developments for the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, because a lot of that falls within that department much more than this, which is why this is why I'm hinting towards this, because I don't understand why they're part of that group. But to give you some idea, this is an organisation where it's got at the top there, and that they've been directing over 2.5 billion of private and public sector investments. I mean, I'm uncertain at this particular point in time. I mean, I'll work towards suggestions when I come to it in BEIS. These particular organisations, it's a matter of whether we actually do encourage this kind of thing. And I mean, that's essentially what they're trying to do, is enable some innovation and to keep the UK sectors, a range of different sectors, as advanced as they possibly can, so that at least in theory we have a stronger competitive position in the marketplace. Is that really a government responsibility? Like I say, it's something it's worth thinking about. The 2.5 billion that they're mentioning there, I'd have to look into later on. I'll look into the details of that, because the way that works, because I have had a bit of involvement with this sort of thing, normally you end up with a scenario where it's like a 50-50 split, if you're lucky. So more than likely, I would say probably around about 65% of that 2.5 billion, that would be taxpayers' money that has essentially gone into attempting to create a relationship between universities and large corporations. They do turn around and say, oh, we help SMEs and all this sort of stuff as well, and that, but rare as rocking horse shit, I can tell you. I mean, they've got the figure. You can't see it at the moment, but they've got the claim here of 4,389 SMEs supported. I know from personal experience and that there's not a great deal of support there. And I'm not talking about my company. So, oh, excuse me. So as much as a lot of this is going into large corporates, it's effectively being an arm to fund the R&D of large organisations that should probably be funding their own R&D. So I'm a little bit uncertain on this one, but I just wanted to point to the fact that sometimes you end up with some slightly unusual links in the departments. I mean, look, so I don't understand why those two organisations would be a part of the registered lobbyists, especially when you consider how many catapults there actually are. I mean, you end up with I think there's 9 main ones, but sort of spread around a little bit. And again, if you remember last week, I'd made mention of the University of Warwick in relation to the University of Warwick in relation to the 2 people from the United Nations. University of Warwick is very heavily involved in this in terms of the high value manufacturing catapult. So, you know, as is always the case, and that you end up with lots of little different links. So let's move forward. This is the situation that we have at the moment in terms of the departments that we've looked at so far, up to these 8 episodes, and just specific within the Cabinet Office. So I've just added the registered lobbyists at the bottom, and it gives us the total of over $1 billion. So it's just that little bit further. I didn't want to put in too many departments because I knew this was going to be quite a long conversation. So I'll be moving forward again next week. Policy developments. Well, it is because of the one at the bottom there, and I think it's best to abolish it. It does give us that little bit of extra saving, so now we're at 4.15 billion in potential savings. Like I said, I think the replacement strategies or the replacement solutions in terms of having a guideline, or, well, I mean, even a strict policy really, as to who has access and how they have access and in what areas they have access and so forth, and the transparency of such. I don't think that requires a department, and it certainly doesn't require the expense. So that's the suggestion that I'm making in terms of this. So again, any feedback, ideas, how would you deal with it? Let me know. Okay, so time's moving on, which means we need to get into
Fuck off! Who do you think you are, you cheeky fucking swat?
Yes, do like that. So let's do the United Nations. Now, I've picked the International Labour Organization this time because they were listed amongst one of the organisations that was having direct meetings with DFID, Department for International Trade. If you go back up the slides and have a look, you'll see them listed in there. I don't like this organisation. Like I say, it is part of the United Nations, though they do have a longer history than the United Nations itself. Again, I'll go into much more detail around exactly who they are at a later date. I just want to concentrate on the individual himself at the moment. Obviously you can see most of the details. I mean, I'll cover up some of it, but never mind. This is essentially the background of this guy. Now, for him to come from Liverpool, it's no great stretch of the imagination to understand now that the head office for the International Labour Organisation in the UK is based in Liverpool. Now, the thing about Liverpool and this guy, I'm going to upset a whole bunch of people from Liverpool now. It is a well-known area for spitting out socialists and communists. I don't know what the hell it is in the water of Liverpool that makes so many people come out of that city with this mindset, but it just happens to be true. This particular guy, when you look at his track record, I mean, in terms of work positions, for a start off, I mean, International Labour Organisation, you would expect somebody within that organisation to have at least some notion of both sides of the equation. He doesn't. This man has come out of university and gone straight into unions. I mean, the guy is just straight through, as per usual, with all of the tentacles of the United Nations, just full on bloody socialist. You know something's wrong when you've got people like this at the head of so many of their organisations. And then when you start to think, well, with all of the crap that's been happening lately, where all these youngsters seem to have completely lost the plot, and there's a fair few elderly ones as well, it's no wonder when you've got bloody career commies like this sitting at the tops of these organisations. I mean, what does he know about running a business and the difficulties of maintaining a workforce? This is not to say that all organisations treat their employees fairly, because that's plainly not the case. But I've yet to come across anybody within unions that has got any sort of basic reality as to how an organisation should be structured and how they should look after their employees. I mean, you have to basically hope that there's two elements to that. The first and foremost, that the person running the organisation or the management within it are decent people. If they're not, why work there? And if you are an employee and you're being mistreated, why would you take it? Why don't you just turn around and say, fuck this, I'm going somewhere else? You know, there is that option. People don't have to just sit there and get abused all the time. I mean, obviously I have spent time working for other organisations. I've not always had my own company. Whenever I've come across situations in any company that I've worked for, if there's been something taking place that I knew damn well was wrong, I was the first one to open my mouth. I'll give one example. I won't go into the name of the company, but there was a particular document that was being circulated to say that we all had to, in the event of a fire or in the event of any sort of emergency situation, we had to prioritise the work that we were doing to make sure that that was safe before ensuring the safety of ourselves. And this document was going around expecting everybody to sign it and say, yes, I agree to this. Well, a whole bunch of people had signed this document, and then it ended up on my desk, at which point I went over to the department manager and said, you can stick that up your ass. I'm not signing it. If there's a fire, if there's an emergency, I'm sorry, but people come first. Simple as that. You're supposed to look after your workforce. So no, I'm not signing it. And it did cause quite a bit of a stir, and it ended up me having a conversation with the president of the company, where I said to his face as well, there's no way in fuck I'm doing that. Turned out that the president had absolutely no idea that this document was being circulated, and he was absolutely furious, and genuinely so. It wasn't just sort of, shit, how am I going to get out of this one? He genuinely had no idea. And literally within 2 days, this document was circulated saying, under no circumstances do you pay any attention to this. So it is possible for employees to actually stand up for themselves. You don't have to hand over your money and that to some useless git. Because quite frankly, I mean, I do know people that have been parts of unions, and of a bigger bunch of piss artists you'll never come across. That's where your money goes. So, another career socialist for the United Nations. Don't need them. Don't need them, don't want them. And the amount, I think the amount of money that the UK, because I think there's 183, is it 183? Yeah, something like that. Countries that are signed up to this labour organisation, and as much as the UK contribution is not specifically stated, I estimate that from other UN organisations the percentage tends to be around about 7%. So I'm assuming it's something similar with this one, which would mean that if the UK turned around and said no thanks, that would save us another around about £42 million. Much better places for that to be spent, because again, when it comes down to this sort of organisation, I mean, I will be putting a link in the description and that to some of the documentation around these people. Some of the stuff that they're putting together and handing out to governments, I mean, seriously, what business is it of theirs? Who voted for these people? Where's a manifesto for somebody to vote on and say whether we want to pay any attention to these people? I've never seen one, and it doesn't exist. So exactly who the hell these people think they are is beyond me. If we must have unions, which I'm very dubious about, as you can tell, if we must have representation of some description, it's within your nation. Not a bunch of bloody ponces flying around Geneva and New York and whatever and that and getting pissed wherever they go. Not interested. Let's have that money spent on something real, an actual benefit for people. So here's another one, gone. Right, I'm only doing the one of them for the United Nations because I've probably gone on for too long already, but oh well. World Economic Forum. This one is going to be a short one. It is PepsiCo, and I've chosen them for one specific reason, and that is because of, as you can see, the Gatorade support of Black Lives Matter. Now, for them to hand over $500,000 to communists, and if anybody hasn't seen it yet, I think I will be having a link in the description. I'd have to check later. But there is the video that is freely available for anybody to see, where the organiser, the co-founder of Black Lives Matter, admitting that they are trained Marxists. So if you've got a company or a brand like Gatorade that must have permission from the parent company Pepsico, if they are then prepared to hand over money to a bunch of bloody commies, then hand over the keys to your business, because that's effectively what it means. If you're looking towards supporting communists by definition will control the assets. There will be no private companies, so hand over the keys. You fucking idiots. I mean, seriously, take a leaf out of Red Bull's book, fire them. And anybody out there that drink, I mean, I don't drink this crap anyway, but anybody out there that does, add it to the list of, go and get a bottle of Lucasade or something like that. I mean, I'm hoping Lucasade haven't done the same shit. I don't know, I haven't looked into it yet. But don't buy their crap. If that's what they're going to try to promote, don't have any involvement in it. I could go into a couple of other areas around PepsiCo, because when you look at scandals that they've been involved with over the years, there are a couple of others, but I'm a little bit less inclined to do it, because one of them is around water usage, and again there's a case that took place around India, and it just strikes me as a strange complaint. I mean, so yeah, there was a water shortage and Pepsi was using large amounts of water. They make drinks. What the fuck do you think they're going to be doing? You know, it seems like a bit of a daft thing for everybody to be getting their knickers in a twist about. There's also PepsiCo was named along with a couple of others around all of this palm oil scenario. I have seen some programs before and that around how palm oil, the locations themselves and that, and how it slices up orangutans and things of this nature. I don't. There's parts of that again that I don't quite understand. I mean, palm oil itself is that such a bad thing? I'm not really convinced of that. And if you want to try to save the orangutans, then close it off. You know, do something to make sure that the orangutans are not attracted to go in there. You know, surely there's got to be a better solution. I mean, yes, obviously, in that from what I've seen and what I've heard, and I mean, I don't really understand how these plants cause this level of damage, but it does seem to just slice them to pieces, which is really quite bizarre. And it's a horrible thing to see, and yeah, of course you'd want to avoid that, but surely then, like I said, that you have to look towards, well, how can we be able to have these plants and use them effectively, and how can we protect the orangutans or any other particular creature that's negatively affected at the same time? I mean, surely there's got to be a way around it, rather than everybody sort of screaming and shouting and going, "Oh, those bloody capitalists!" You know, it just seems a bit of an illogical one to me. So I'm bringing up PepsiCo simply because of this stuff of Gatorade and Black Lives Matter, because it's absolute nonsensical bollocks. I mean, seriously, all of you corporations that are out there, any of you that have been handing over money to these communists, if you're giving money to Black Lives Matter, if you're giving money to bloody Antifa or any of that sort of stuff, yeah, we're all well aware of what the various agendas are and that you think you're going to be pushing through. And it's always quite plainly bloody obvious who the useful idiots are, and Black Lives Matter is one of them. But seriously, are you really this fucking stupid? I mean, you know, sort your bloody lives out. You're not going to take over the world. Get a grip. And what you will get, as things start, because trust me, once you start trying to push this shit too hard, it will backfire, and it will backfire badly. And if you want to be the one that takes the hit, that's up to you. I don't recommend it. So I would have somebody seriously having a think about what the hell they're playing at. So I'll have to play this one back to myself and see if I've made any sense at all. Because it is one of these, especially the lobbyist side of things, and that there's so many different considerations around that particular solution. Identifying where the problems really lay and being able to make sense of it, understanding what the benefits are, understanding what the wider perspective of that is. Like I say, there's so much around that. I mean, I could have made this probably something like around about 7 hours long, especially with the amount of data that I've got around it. But hopefully it gives you a little bit of perspective. Hopefully I haven't spoken too much gibberish, as I tend to. Like I say, not quite in Biden mode yet, but give it time. So the closing will be as per usual. Well, none of you are really coming forward with the myriad directory, are you? Are you also determined to get down on one knee and pray to the new false god of socialism and communism? Are you all really that weak and feeble? Are you all that stupid? I say, this is not a paid advertisement, and I think it will do everybody a bit of good to let it be known. Because, I mean, one example, over all this Ponzi China virus, I did put out some research figures on LinkedIn yesterday, just to point out various areas where, once again, it's all over the place, and that these people are reporting total bollocks. But I had been giving warnings that things would start to change and there would be a backlash. And we saw finally in London, a part of that backlash, about 35,000 people turned up to protest in London. And there's going to be another one on September the 26th, I believe. Those numbers will grow. Those numbers will definitely start to grow. When you're in a corporate organisation, whether you're even if you're in a small business, if you don't understand which is the right side of the fence to be sat on by now, then shit, I don't know what to tell you. It won't work out well for you. It really won't. Read your bloody history books. It will not work out. So, letting people know that you're just doing your job to the best of your abilities and you're not out to push anybody's agenda only ends up doing you a favour. Let people know that. Okay? So, yeah, you don't have to be a part of the myriad directory. I mean, you just let it be known yourself. It's entirely up to you, like I say. But be on the right side of the equation. So hopefully there's been something of interest in here anyway. And I'll continue with the Cabinet Office in next week's episode. Don't know what I'll be calling it yet, or don't know how many departments I'll do. We just keep moving forward until we've got everything mapped out for all the departments, what the suggestions are going to be, how it should all be implemented. Then we move forward to having the wiring diagram set up, which is where, at the right point in time, everybody's got to start thinking about economic policies, areas like that. There's some stuff to be talked about. I mean, I'm having to refresh my memory on a lot of stuff at the moment about that. I've been watching stuff around the Austrian School of Economics, the Chicago school, a whole range of different scenarios. Keynesian, don't want that. And whether we actually need a new form of economy, not a socialist one. There's a range of different areas in that. Like I say, I mean, it will be complex. We go through this so that it becomes simplified at the end. Okay, that's the goal of what we're looking to achieve. So keep well, keep out of trouble, be well, and I'll see you next week. Ta-ra.